Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Hangout, or Rewind. Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today on Roll20.net. Follow the show on social media. We're at SWGM Podcast on Twitter and Facebook. You can also support the show on Patreon/SWGM Podcast and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well as iTunes with the same moniker, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Tonight's episode, bright ideas, things inspired, interesting genre mashups in Savage Worlds inspired by the Netflix original Bright. We're not making, just as a caveat, want to point out here, we're not going to discuss how you would make Bright frame for frame in Savage Worlds, but using that as an inspiration point to top off, we'll talk about genre mashups and how to pull them off with campaign world building. Here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
You were so close on the intro. So close.
I know, just a long day at work. Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
My mom always said I was kind of bright.
And some call him Jib.
My mom always said stupid is as stupid does, sir.
You're going to finish your mashed taters? Okay, so the original
So mashup.
So let's talk Bright. Bright gets we kind of touched based on this in a previous podcast episode, and kind of want to just kind of expand from there because we didn't really give it enough airtime, I don't feel. So the world goes crazy for Bright. Oh, it's the most amazing thing ever. It's Lethal Weapon with orcs, I think is what we all decided last time. It's every freaking Lethal Weapon buddy cop movie you've ever seen. The only difference is, we live in a world where there are orcs and elves and fairy magic. Substitute huge heroin shipment for magic wand. And run that shit. So let's kind of talk about how you pull that off using the Savage Worlds core rules. If you have access to the fantasy companion or the sci-fi companion or even the superheroes companion, any of the companions, you might want to pull some information from there. But everything you kind of really need to run Bright, all self-contained in the core rules, the Savage Worlds core rule deluxe, even down to what are the character stats for the orc race? What are the character stats for elves? How does magic work?
It's arcane backgrounds, duh.
It's all right there, right?
I would just throw this out there. What if the wands that we see in Bright are just weird science devices, and every time we see somebody who doesn't have weird science as an arcane background pick up a wand, it's an automatic explosion. I mean, that's all we're really talking about right there. The first mechanic you throw out is if you are not a Bright and you pick up a wand, it's a major malfunction on the weird science device, and it resulted in an explosion causing, 10d8 or something. Like, you make it ludicrous.
Yeah, ramp it up.
The whole, massive backlash thing. I mean, we see it about an entire room of people in an instant, so...
I couldn't agree more. You could also make it a component for casting any magic and say, hey, that's where all the power points are stored is in the wand. It's a magical battery. And that's where your power points are stored.
People don't. The magicians don't have the power points. It's all about the wand.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's an interesting mechanic in and of itself. Is you hear people talk about.
Whoa! I realized what I said.
No, I was just going to say. No, I just heard something in my head. It's my brain. You don't.
It's all the wand. Yeah, okay.
No, it's all about the wand. No grimoire.
Okay. There you go.
But we hear people all the time talk about with Savage Worlds they can't do magic that requires an implement. Whether it's the Shadowrun shamanistic fetishes, or you've got the wands and such from D&D, the rods, etc. I think the real crux of giving a magic user this big, powerful, magical stick that shoots stuff is the battery. All their power points come from that, and when it's used up, they have to wait for it to recharge. rather than, oh, I have all these power points. No, you know how to do certain powers, but you need that wand to be able to do them because it's got the actual power to do it.
Right. That would be my takeaway from using Bright as an example, is that the wand is actually a magical battery with all your power points in it. And then you learn spells, because I think even the character in there was like, I only know a couple of spells.
Yeah.
Like she's not a powerful magician. She hasn't gone through that tutelage yet and learned everything.
So when it runs out of power points, does it still have that automatic catastrophe if somebody who's not a Bright picks it up?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that's just a material reality.
I think they said that enough in the lore that, yeah, you have to give it to it, but I get where you're coming from. Like, is it a used up wand until it starts to recharge? So it's not dangerous.
Yeah, and so is that a time
so
when...
every once in a while you could pick it up safely, but then the next time you picked it up, now that'd be fun.
Yeah, that was my thought. It's safe for a little while, but you never know when it's going to become unsafe.
Yeah, there's no physical tell. It's just laying there, and you have to decide: are you brave enough to see if it's out of power points?
So we're talking every
stove. Is that hot?
So we're talking basically every power point is worth 2d10 explosion,
something like that.
Whatever it has charges of.
Wow, that's heavy duty.
Like I said, we see it vaporize an entire room. So
that's very true.
But I think there's a lot of interesting directions that you could easily go with something like that. But I think the more interesting aspect is figuring out what kind of a story you want to tell first. You know, like Bright is very clearly a buddy cop type story that they're trying to tell. Whereas if you went more of like a Shadowrun direction, and the reason I keep bringing it up is because that's what all the talk was prior to it coming out, was that this was the Shadowrun the movie. And it really wasn't, but that's very much a post-apocalyptic kind of dystopian future version. And then you've got, the other end of the spectrum, kind of the Fifth Element, which is the same kind of a dystopian future with, different alien races and whatnot. And you still have magic. You still absolutely have all the same things, but Fifth Element goes a different direction with it. So
and the wand makes a big bada boom.
Yeah, I mean it really comes down to what kind of story you're wanting to tell, I think, and then building from there rather than building from, hey, I want to recreate this thing I saw on TV.
Right. Well, and there's also things you can do too with Savage Worlds to fine tune the races if you want. If you want, for example, the elves in Bright are very, very acrobatic. So you could always give them you could always just say, hey, we're going to go kind of dip over into the race creation rules in Savage Worlds and add an extra +2 layer with another offset. Like maybe they don't do as well in the sunlight. Maybe they're averse to sunlight. It's too bright for them to see things because they have infravision. Or, if you want to make sure they have infravision, whatever you want to do to kind of fine tune an existing race that's already in the Savage Worlds core rulebook, whether it be elf, orc, dwarf, whatever, you could always dip into the race creation and kind of build that and balance it out to make them a slightly different, your world's version of what an elf is.
Now, one thing I do want to point out is that core rules, at least, does not have stats for an orc. It has stats for a half orc. So you do have to do a little manipulation there. If you want that true orc in your game, you want to take a look at the fact that the one that's in the core rules is half orc. I believe the Fantasy Companion has a full orc in it, though, and it wouldn't be hard to kind of work backwards from the orc in the bestiary to create a racial template.
Right. And for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about with a racial template, if you're new to the show, you're new to the system, what it assumes is that the human special ability is a free edge at character creation, and that's worth 2 points. So what you do is you create another race who does not get that free edge, and instead you assign them something from that list worth 2 points. And if you give them over 2 points, then you have to balance it out with negative abilities that cancel that out. If they end up, your racial ends up with a +2 racial ability bonus essentially from the racial template in the chapter 1 character creation, making races. So the racial ability replaces the human's free edge, and that new race character does not get a free edge at character creation. They have a special racial ability instead. So, but that's like what Deb was saying, is you could take a look at the orc and the core rules. Even if you wanted to have a player character go, I want to play a troll. Okay, well, let's take a look at the troll from the bestiary, look at their special abilities, and kind of figure out the math on that. You don't have to go with that exactly. If you have some different idea about what a troll is for you, work it out with your GM. If your GM is okay with you creating a troll race, go ahead, work it out.
Yeah, and I mean, you can also take the races that are there. Like, I know you've also got like the half folk, you've got the Rakshasan, things like that are there as races. You could take that and say the half folk are the stats you're going to use for gnomes, or the Rakshasan are the stats you're going to use for the orc, or the lizard man. You can retrap the existing races as necessary as well.
Right. So, and just as an example, let's talk about the main character, the orc cop in Bright. So part of that orc culture is being blooded or not being blooded. And if you're not blooded, you get no respect with the orcs. So that character, if you're building that character, they're not blooded. Guess what? They've got the outsider hindrance.
See that?
Not only with
and you tweak it a little bit. Tweak it a little bit. So.
I think you would have the outsider hindrance either way. It would just depend on who do you have the outsider hindrance with.
I think you would have it with humans as well as orcs if you're not blooded.
And
but
that's what I'm saying. I think you end up with a racial modifier that is, racial animosity orc. And that is all the other races look down on you because you sided with the Dark Lord.
That's fair.
And then
that would certainly be a good way to do it.
And then as a player character, I make the choice to take the outsider hindrance because I'm a bad orc too.
Right. I'm not blooded.
Now I look down on by both sides,
Right. And you might want to say your racial, if you're taking orcs from Bright, you might want to say, they're a little bit larger than the standard human. They're a little bit more, they start with D6 in strength automatically at character creation because they're just
make them brawny.
Yeah. Maybe they lean towards the bloodthirsty hindrance as a race. That could be a racial hindrance. They kind of just lean towards bloodthirsty. So you can play that out if you wanted. It's kind of really open to your interpretation of what you want to happen.
Vengeful minor. They always truly take slight from insults.
Right. You disrespected me.
Somehow it's a respect thing.
Yeah, you disrespected me. I'm going to make you pay for that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you get that scene, I believe, when they're running through the bar and he's like, orcs remember.
And then everything else you see in Bright, go watch Bright for Netflix, break it down. The whole thing with the car is just an extended chase scene. Yeah. With them even going into the supermarket with the car and everything else. It's all just one extended chase scene, abstracted over hours. If you wanted to break it down, if you're watching Bright and you're watching that breakdown, the minute they start running, that's first round in a chase, and then a whole bunch of crap happens. Now we're going to run the second round in a chase an hour later, and then 30 minutes later, here's the third round in a chase. So understand that a chase mechanic or even a dramatic task in Savage Worlds doesn't have to happen concurrent seconds over a span of a minute, or it can range over days, weeks, months, to where you keep coming back to it. It's all done depending on how you want to do it and what kind of pace you want to set for your story. And that's another thing too, from a GM kind of angle. Use dramatic tasks and use chases to your advantage to establish pacing. I think it's one thing that's kind of overlooked. Everybody tries to rush through a dramatic task and do it all in one sitting, so to speak. You can just go, okay, here's the first round of dramatic task. All right, moving on. And the player characters may go, well, wait a minute. Did we fail the task? Well, we don't know yet. You're not going to make your second roll on this until Tuesday. When you reach this town, we're not going to know. So you can kind of build suspense and run pacing. You can kind of use the rules as written to your advantage to run pace. And Savage Worlds will even tell you that a dramatic task can take place over hours, minutes, seconds, days, weeks, however you want to run it.
You know, I hear there's a new official licensed setting out there. It has a different version of the dramatic task that's a little more malleable, a little changeable, that does some different things. And that might be a great thing to harvest for a session like what we see that movie being, is to run something like what Chris and them designed in Hell and High Water. And
Yeah,
for the life of me, I can't remember what those are called, Chris.
We actually called it a chaos situation because it was a dramatic task and a chase, and just the whole chaos of it. So we just called it a chaos situation. And you can kind of map that out and kind of plan that out a little bit based on what's going on in the scene. I mean, it's malleable. You can change it, but you can kind of say, okay, this is kind of what's going on in the scene, and these are the different things that could happen based off of what their card draws are. Like they get the club, this is what their complication is going to be to get past the, and you can kind of map it out. We have one in the book, and then we have a blank table where you can map it out yourself to kind of combine those two into one ongoing. It's the we're trying to get off the island as the volcano's exploding and the lava's chasing us. So there's that dramatic task and that chase, put them together, and it's chaos.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that would work great to take that and kind of map out a session like what we see in the movie of, okay, well, we're going to grab this wand, and now we've got to get the wand from point A to point B, and there's 3 separate groups that are after us that want this thing back.
Yeah, certainly. It would work. Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. Oh, we're being chased by the pointy-eared government feds. The orcs want it, and the gang members, the East LA gangbangers want it as well. Oh, God damn it.
Which suit you draw determines the next event, which
exactly.
Right.
I can really see a room for something like that to be, used. And, yet again, this is where we say all the time to use the core rules, and absolutely you could run it with core rules, but that doesn't mean you can't draw from some of this. Like we talked about in the green room, how would you actually handle the character that is a bright? And, one of the suggestions was the Herald from Deadlands. You don't know if you're a bright until you reach out and grab that. And then we draw a card, and if you're lucky, you don't explode.
Right.
Yeah, would you do it like the Herald though? And would you make it you have to draw a Joker? Because that's not a real big chance of that happening.
I think
I don't know that I would do that, because
I think if
the
you're
odds
a
are
twerk,
very
you
low.
absolutely need a Joker.
Why not, Jim?
I think I would just make the decision myself.
As a GM, just make the decision yourself?
Yeah.
Whether it's dramatically appropriate to the story or whether it's been foreshadowed enough through gameplay.
Whether it's dramatically relevant, whether it's
organic.
Something that would be interesting and noteworthy to the character.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong, but my guess would be you would talk to the player character beforehand.
I'd probably have some idea of what they wanted.
Right.
Yeah, I would absolutely ask the player, like, hey, if you become a bright, are you happy with that? Before I make that decision, because you might have the player who's doing that as the sacrifice moment. They're trying to grab that and take the hit for the team, and you've just stolen their thunder in this cooperative storytelling by suddenly bamf, and now they're a more powerful character.
Right. You'd have to make sure that, definitely make sure that's what they want, and make sure that they're okay with exploding.
Yeah. I'll say this. If the character told me they wanted to be a bright, I'm like, okay, I got a problem with that. But make sure we understand what being a bright means. Hunted, wanted major by everybody. Constant onslaught.
Yeah.
Of everyone in the world and other worlds and demons and shit wanting what you've got.
Yeah. Some of them want you because they want the favors you can do for them. Some of them want you as a slave, and some of them want to kill you to take you out of the pool of people who could cause them problems later.
Mm-hmm.
Or kill you, bring you back, and make you a slave.
Right. So understand what you're signing up for if you tell me you want to be a Bright. I'm all about going, hey, no problem. But just make sure you read the fine print in the brochure and don't whine when the full force of the world comes crashing down
on your
character's head. Yeah.
And again, that's not to say that that's the best scenario either. You might want that random chance in your game. You and your players might all, be far more in, favor of letting it be a random card draw to see what happens, because no, the player doesn't necessarily want to be a Bright for all the reasons Jared just listed off. but as a GM, you're going, for the story, it would kind of make sense if one of them could be a Bright. So flip the card and see what happens. Again, this comes back to that adage that Jib always throws out. We only roll the dice when we disagree. We only need to draw the card for the random mechanic when we disagree at the table about what makes the best story or the best game.
Couldn't agree more.
Yep.
And then, so using that as a jumping off point, there's talk in the Bright series about orcs used to serve the Dark Lord. That's very, very ominous and also very vague on purpose. They don't really go into a lot of detail about the Dark Lord, except there's this society.
Wait, you mean like Tolkien, where there's the Dark Lord and no one actually knows anything about him?
Right.
Or are we talking the He Who Shall Not Be Named?
Yes. Yes, as well. And also to the whole medieval society of sword bearing guys with tattoos, special tattoos that are supposed to. Your partner's part of the prophecy. He's chosen. Is it the ranting of some old lunatic guy, or is he a member of the secret society, or is he just some bum who just got a little too much hooch, and now he's walking around with a sword?
Yeah, and remember that they had to do this in an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So they didn't have a whole lot of time to work with to do exposition.
Right, and the point of it was it's Lethal Weapon. It's not Lord of the Rings. The focus is on it. This is Lethal Weapon. This is a buddy cop movie, but we live in this world with orcs and stuff. We kind of got to give it a little bit of exposition and lip service.
Well, and I think there's a level of it too that I think Jim is touching on, where you've got a truncated amount of time. That's true in your game too. You don't need reams and reams of backstory, as we've talked about before. When the game starts, you just need to know, hey, there's this historical fact that your race is hated because you once sided with insert big fluffy badass name, and go on from there. And then when big fluffy insert badass name becomes relevant to your story, that's when you create that lore. You don't need to create that in advance to make it work.
Right. But you can kind of figure out, okay, do we have a prophecy? Is there a prophecy? Is there an Illuminati type society of rangers or clerics that are keeping the Dark Lord at bay? Well, was he put away? There's nothing wrong with
I hope so.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with pondering, playing around with that, right? And kind of having it in the back of your head, and then when certain opportunities in the story just naturally present themselves and jump out, you can start foreshadowing that.
Mm-hmm.
I
wouldn't foreshadow it quite as much as they do in the movie, though.
No,
because no one's surprised by a few of the things that happen in that movie.
But you can say things like, this wand is different than any wand you've ever seen before. Ooh, maybe this is a key to a portal and a wand. I'm just saying that kind of thing. If you're kind of thinking in advance. There's nothing wrong doing a little bit of thought experiment, but I agree with Dave, and I agree with what we said before in the podcast is you don't need to write it all down. Just sort of daydream it a little bit, think about it, have it in your head, so you kind of know you got some vague idea of what's going on in your world and what might happen.
Now, the flip side of that is, I think the part you do need to sit down and kind of have set in stone is, what are the realities of the world your characters are living in? Again, are you going space travel like a like a Fifth Element? Are you going cyberpunk where there's cybernetics and evil corporations like a Shadowrun? Or are you going modern day racial tensions in Watts that boil down to orcs and humans and elves replacing the current racial struggles that we have in the real world? And then once you've determined that, start saying, okay, well, what effect does having orcs on the game have? Are orcs all the professional athletes? Well, no, they're only the professional athletes in sports where that stands out. And then you've got, like all your professional tennis players or runners are probably elves, while, things like that. You sit down and figure out kind of where the rubber meets the road, the realities of the world that as a GM you need to have as notes, so that when the players pass by a billboard and they say, well, what's on the billboard? You can say, well, it's this really, star professional NFL orc who's doing a watches ad, or, it's an ad for, Coca-Cola, which is the Coca-Cola of your world. Have a few details like that you've figured out that are different from the real world, or that stand out as notes that you can feather in before you hit the table.
Right. And also figure out what your comedic level is as well. Like, for example, like using Dave's example, it could be an orc energy drink now with new pulp, or with live flesh, or new and improved with a taste of blood. Kind of to figure out where the comedy level is on that, so you're maintaining a certain tone that you're trying to project throughout the game, and it's consistent as well. So yeah, he might be actually right. Like, maybe all the news and broadcasters are a mixture of elves and humans.
Mm-hmm.
An orc sports commentator might be great, but nobody will hire an orc sports commentator because the public just wouldn't accept it. That kind of stuff. Is there a magical CIA? What are the rules on magic in that world? Is it highly restricted?
We talked about this. Yeah, we talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about, we'll come up with an idea of what's the magical economy, what's the effect on your world the existence of magic has. Is it outlawed by the local government? Are there stipulations and taxes on it? Is there a certain magical cost to when you use a power, or are there guys on the corners just turning tin cans into gold coins and handing them out randomly to people?
Right.
You have to figure out where magic falls. Now, Bright obviously comes down with a very kind of, I want to say, outlaw-esque version of magic. Yes, there are those who are using it for the greater good, kind of like there's those who carry around submachine guns working for the police force. But by the same token, there's also some bad guys out there that have the submachine guns too. And in Bright's world, there's some bad guys out there that have magic. And I think you can play those kind of ideas, but you have to figure that out before you get to the table.
Right. Well, and I'll use Kirkman, creator of The Walking Dead, is a good example. That one of the nice things about that is you can tell that he is a fan of the zombie apocalypse genre, and has spent some time sitting and thinking about, well, what would a world overrun by the dead be like to live there on a day-to-day basis? What would the survivors be like, to the point where you start to see, like in the governor, actually using the undead as a defense mechanism, as for defenses. Oh, well, of course, that seems like a rational outcome of what would automatically come out of that. So kind of thinking these things out in advance gives your world a more realistic feel. And I hate to use the word, and I'm going to use it, but it can help perpetuate a sense of immersion, to where what you're talking about is a natural thing that somebody may not have thought of before, but in light of what you're talking about, oh, okay, I can see where that would make sense. I wouldn't imagine that you would, like, for example, you might put a bunch of undead chained to a grist mill with a live rabbit just dangling in front of them to turn a grist mill in a survivor community. And okay, well, that makes sense. Oh, what is their law? Oh, well, their law is they put you in a pit, gladiator wise, and you're surrounded by walkers, and we let one man walk out. That's how we decide things here. I mean, those kind of things, thinking that kind of stuff through could really help you as a GM to have narrative points already on deck when it comes time to describe something, and it can help your players get a little bit more involved in, oh wow, this feels like a real world. It doesn't feel like the GM just give me some flowery description. Oh, this actually makes sense. Fits for what we're talking about. Okay, so where else might you do some genre mix-ups? I mean, you could take the same concept of Bright that we were talking about earlier and throw it into the Old West, right? Or you could have a Western where there are no humans. I mean, I don't know how well, I don't know of very many settings where humans aren't the main player character, but what about it?
Right.
Yeah, again, set the orcs as the bad guys, as the black hats.
Mm-hmm.
Or what about setting the humans as the black hats and everybody plays orcs?
There you go.
Well, I mean,
See, I think that would be more fun personally.
We have a setting like that, Goblin Horde from.
I was about to bring that up.
Richard Wilcox.
Thank you. Wilcox. Goblin Horde is a great just role reversal kind of a thing, but I think from a mashup standpoint, while it does a great job of role reversal, it doesn't really change the combination of things up. It's still traditional fantasy, just told from the opposite role.
Right.
Whereas for me, if I was going to do that, if I'm going to run a traditional fantasy, I don't care who the white hats and the black hats are. I'm going to suddenly introduce aliens, or I'm going to suddenly introduce King Kong, or I'm suddenly going to introduce zombies. Everyone does the modern day zombie apocalypse. Well, what about the zombie apocalypse that happens in the Middle Ages? The Black Plague turns out to actually be the zombie apocalypse, and now we're going to run that story, or something along those lines. I think is what to me makes a better mashup. Take something that's just not done together and try that.
I'm trying to think of another one that might be interesting.
Well, I mean, almost anything you do with taking fantasy characters, fantasy races, established Western fantasy, and then throwing it in a blender and setting it in some other just average setting is gonna still feel familiar enough. Like, okay, we're playing a Western. Okay, but instead of Native Americans, it's orc tribes. Okay.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, I think what you could do too, and what a good thing to look at is, and God, why can't I remember his name? The guy who writes the speculative history. Like he wrote the book about the guys who go back to the Civil War and they have automatic weapons. And it changes the entire way that the Civil War goes, and I can't remember his name.
There's a lot of alternate history writers, so I don't know which one you're talking about.
And he's written a number of, the Nazis have won won World War II. He wrote it was 1876 or 1776 was the name of the book. I'm gonna have to look it up and see, because now it's gonna drive me crazy.
Well, I mean, you're talking about also a genre mashup, something that's very popular, done already, Planet of the Apes. The whole idea that apes become the dominant species on the planet and mankind's enslaved. It's kind of a genre mashup.
Yeah. Yep.
Which would not be difficult to do in Savage Worlds. Ape just becomes a trapping for human. I mean, here's the other thing too, is if you're going to kind of do these genre mashups of things, don't overthink it. Just kind of ask yourself, okay, wait, can we accept that if we're saying that apes have risen to the station of humans, that I could just create a human character and tell everybody you look like an ape? Pick what kind of ape. Maybe I have maybe different edges. Racial templates for types of apes, chimpanzee or gorilla or orangutan,
and that's actually already out there. If you go and you look at Day After Ragnarok, they have the ape. There's a chimpanzee. There's a orangutan race. There's a gorilla race. I don't remember what they're all called. And the guy was thinking it was Harry Turtledove.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, Turtledove does a lot of alt history. So from chat, Timothy Davis says, if you're going to build the Bright world, why not start with Thin Blue Line from Melee or Via and then mix it with the various compendiums? I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of Thin Blue Line when it came out, and I haven't dug deep enough in it to know if there's anything there I would want to use.
Yeah, I don't own it. I don't own it. I've never read it, so I really can't say.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about just building a campaign world, you could, steal from anything that you want.
And I think that's a crux of it is just because we're not mentioning a specific, book to draw from doesn't mean that it's a bad source. If it's going to make a good game for you and your players, draw from it. There's an entire swath of people who play Savage Worlds who absolutely love Rippers, and they steal from it for an amalgam of many different settings. And I won't play with any of them. That doesn't mean that it's not fun for them. It just means I hate Rippers on such a visceral level that I won't find it enjoyable.
Well, and it's like we've talked about before, too. Like, oh, well, how do you do Firefly? Just pick up Deadlands Reloaded and tell everybody it's Firefly. There's nothing you really need to do. It's a Western in space. Okay, we have computers. We also have steam-powered trains. It depends on what world you're on. It doesn't flip and matter. And Deadlands is going to give you the core rules you need for, duels and hanging and the whole Western feel and vibe of everything. It's already kind of plotted out for you. Just drop all of the magic stuff. Maybe if you want, leave it in as psionics. If you want the whole Blue Harvest, is it Blue Harvest? It's not Blue Harvest. What's the name of the company in Firefly? It's Blue something.
Blue Sun, I think.
Yeah, but maybe it's Blue Sun. You want Blue Sun?
There should be, Blue Harvest, Blue Sun, Purple Veritas. There's too many things in different movies. I lost track.
Right. If you want that flavor, fine. Keep the blessed or
Yeah, you're right. The Blue Sun Corporation.
Yeah. Bring in psionics for the whole River Tam thing if you want to incorporate that. The point is, I think as role players we rely too much on where's the source book. Where's the source book? I'm putting together a setting rule. Where's the source book? It's all smoke and mirrors right here at the table. I could tell you I've personally as a GM come up with Savage Firefly. Can we see the player manual? No. Because I'm actually running Deadlands Reloaded. And I'm just telling you it's Firefly. Because I'm presenting it that way.
I have filed off the serial numbers, added a few more things, and I've told you now you're playing Firefly.
I've trapped the narrative, and I'm interpreting the dice rolls. That's all it takes.
Right. Oh, we're in space? Oh, you know what? I also happen to have Pirates of the Spanish Main for any kind of space naval battle. I'm not telling you that. It's all spaceships.
And I think that's also another aspect of this. I had floated the idea a while back of traditional fantasy races in non-fantasy settings. Modern day elves, futuristic elves, etc. And I got such a huge negative backlash from the community about no, if it's modern day or forward, it has to be aliens. I won't accept, fantasy races in my sci-fi. You don't get your chocolate in my peanut butter, don't get your peanut butter in my chocolate. And I think there's an aspect of it that you have to be willing to kind of stick to your guns and just present it as fun. If you think your players are going to enjoy it, use the rules they're going to enjoy, and then wrap it up in this really pretty trapping box. And then on top of it, so your players really want a grim, gritty world. They every game you play with them uses gritty damage, uses critical failures. It's your job, even when you're running fantasy, to make that gritty. When the dice rolls come up, you have to interpret that dice roll in a gritty manner, despite the fantastic world that it's happening in. So the fairy laying on the lawn that's just been, driven there by a broom has broken arms. In a gritty setting, or leaves a fairy-shaped imprint in the ground in a more comical, tongue-in-cheek setting, because it's the Looney Tunes. You slap the character down with a broom and it leaves the imprint of them on the ground. I mean, pick your poison, but you can do that without needing a special mechanic to do it. It's all in how you narrate it, how you trap it, how you interpret those dice rolls.
Right. Yeah, I don't need the modern day orc compendium to run it. I just need to know, hey, orcs exist in the modern world. 1, 2, 3, go. I've already got a mechanic that tells me how to deal with everything an orc's going to do and everything a human's going to do to an orc and vice versa. And the rest is just description and storytelling. I think we have a little bit too much of a reliance and dependency on, oh my God, I need to have the complete ultimate guide mechanically to this and that and the other. I need a mechanic for vaccinations, and I need a mechanic for, what happens when you get dysentery, and I need the specific mechanics for specific. No, not if you're playing Savage Worlds, you don't. It's called a fatigue check. Yeah.
I do not disagree with anything that we've been saying. The thing I want to remind us of, though, is that we do this a lot.
That is true.
Do different kinds of games a lot, but we also talk about this a lot.
This is true. I'm not saying that I'm not okay. So let's back up a second. I'm not being pejorative when I say, rise above it, douchebag. Fucking just figure it out. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you don't need to be reliant on, well, what particular setting do I pull what particular thing from? I understand that if you're new to Savage Worlds, or you haven't stepped out and created original campaign rules and settings, it can seem a little bit of a nebulous and kind of complex path to kind of navigate through. And having a source book is definitely helpful. If you can say, hey, Deadlands is good for Westerns, let me steal some stuff from Deadlands. Absolutely. I'm just saying you don't need to sit there and spin those wheels looking through all the different Savage settings and mechanics and rules to try to find something that fits, when the answer is monkeys are the same mechanically as humans. Just describe them as monkeys.
Well, and I'm also going to point out, Chris at the very minimum got a published licensed product on the market that I'm fairly certain he would like you to buy and not create your own pirate setting.
Yes, please.
So, I mean, we're not trying to, we're good friends with a lot of the authors of the licensed products. We're not saying those aren't good books any more than we're saying the compendiums aren't good books. The fantasy companion, despite being the oldest of the companions, is probably the one I use the most.
Probably the best, really.
They haven't republished any of those rules, and it's there's stuff in there that can be apropos to any game I'm running. I mean, the entire loot system that's in that companion is amazing. The bestiary is great if you just need to be able to pull a random foot soldier out. There's some things that are in the bestiary to that really, in my opinion, belong in core. There's not a thug in core's bestiary. There's just not. And there is in the fantasy companion. So, I mean, there's some aspects of the companions that make them great books, but you don't need it to run Savage Worlds. I think where I come down on this is less the rise above douche nozzle, as much as have the faith and the confidence to create that thing that's in your head, rather than looking for someone to have already created a facsimile that gets 75% of the way there.
Right.
Don't accept
I agree with that completely. The big thing I would say is trust yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Trust your instincts. They're probably going to get you where you want to be.
Right. Well, I'll say this about, so for example, Dave's talking about the fantasy companion. I'll say this as a guy who loves horror. If somebody came to me tonight and said, hey, tomorrow at noon, I need you to run Supernatural, the TV show, as a Savage World setting, I would go straight to the horror companion, because their rules for wards, cold iron, demons, rituals, everything I would need to run.
And all of your monsters of the week.
Everything in the supernatural universe is codified clearly in the horror companion. There are specific mechanics for it. And you can tune that into, oh, it's full on Buffy, to, oh no, it's more grittier, supernatural, angels, demons, magic spells, incantations, rules for rituals, demon summoning, the whole 9 yards. It's all there in that companion. And there's nothing wrong with going to that as a genre supplement for ideas. But I agree with what we're trying to communicate is you don't have to sit there and go, well, I guess I can't run it because I can't find a setting that's already plotted it out.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to communicate.
So buy Buccaneer, but if you can't find the setting you want, create it yourself.
Right.
Nice plug. So Sunset Sam makes a point that we've said on the show before that I think bears some slight repeating and tweaking. He says, to Jib's point, not everyone in this hobby is creative. They need templates. And we've said that before as well, that, you know, hey, being creative enough to create the whole world from whole cloth is a lot of work. Even if you have an amazing imagination that's capable of it, does not necessarily mean you want to put the effort in.
That's why I use these things called plot point campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, it goes to that core draw for a lot of older GMs is they don't have the time or the desire to put the effort into that much prep work. So having it there on the page absolutely has its value too.
All right. So anything like well, we brought up pirates. How would we insert as a group just basic opinions in a fantasy pirate genre mix-up? What would your world look like? If it
it wouldn't look like 50 Fathoms unless I was just going to run 50 Fathoms.
I was about to say, just make it look like 50 Fathoms.
I mean, and I'm not, and this is not me saying anything pejorative about 50 Fathoms. It's just, if that's what I'm going to run, I'm going to grab 50 Fathoms. I wouldn't try to recreate the wheel when it already exists.
Right. Are there orcs and elves and dwarves in 50 Fathoms? Or is it mostly aquatic?
It's more fantasy. There's like, I want to say there's crab creatures and stuff like that. It's been a bit since I actually looked deeply into it. I can't remember.
I would say
crab or lobster, but
bird type folks. But I would say that it's more. There's kind of an elf type, but there is not a. I can say, if I recall correctly, there is not a specific elf dwarf in 50 Fathoms.
Right. So, okay, let's say we're gonna take basically the idea of Bright and run Pirates of the Spanish Main or a classical pirate story where we have dwarves and elves and orcs and magic. How do we go about that as a group? Just some general ideas.
I was going to say something else. I was saying get Slipstream.
Well,
I mean, actually, you're not wrong.
You say that, but you're not wrong.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of what it is. But no, I think an interesting aspect of when you start talking the pirate thing is Savage Worlds already gives you 3 really great flavors of pirates. You get Pirates of the Spanish Main, which is kind of vanilla. It sits right in the middle. And then you've got a little more verisimilitude, a little more kind of punch to it with Buccaneer, and then you've got the true like high fantasy, though I would say more Eastern European fantasy, kind of Grimm's fairy tales fantasy for 50 Fathoms, rather than the traditional Tolkien Western fantasy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think so. I think that's a good way to say 50 Fathoms.
I think what you're talking about, Jared, is more, Tolkien on the high seas.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So, like, for example, if I were running that, dwarves have advanced to iron ships and maybe steam technology on the high seas, whereas elves are the more purist and traditional, natural. Oh, all of our ships are wind sail powered, and
Wooden behemoths.
sturdy wooden behemoths with rowing and wind-powered sails.
Orcs have these junk ships that look like it's the prow off of an elven ship, the engine off of a dwarven cruiser.
Right.
Right.
To use Firefly terminology, I think you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
The whole on marauder thing, and then maybe you set it to where all the magic in the universe is at the bottom of the sea, or it's only available in water. Magic only works as a water elemental type thing, and that's why everybody's out on the seas trying to get their portion of their nation's version of.
Right, they want to harness that.
Right.
I think another aspect to this that would be central is taking the whole loot aspect from a pirate game and tying it directly to your fantasy. So you have these deep sea rubies that hold the power points, or you have pearls that allow you to crack it open and summon elementals and stuff like that. I would create some fantastic style loot that you get when you raid a ship, rather than just, oh look, I got I pirated this ship and I got 50 cows and 900 bales of leather that they were transporting to the local port, because that's what the trader was carrying. No, this time he was carrying Greek fire and wind pearls that when you crack them open, summon a small air genie that helps propel the ship along faster.
Right. I would also add sea serpent, literally. Ocean dragons. Just really turn up the dial on the dragons from the fantasy companion or core rules and say, yeah, but they're all aquatic. They all live at the sea. Maybe you have Cthulhian style, tentacle monsters in certain areas.
Yeah, and there's the
bottom of the sea through like a dimensional portal, and your ship's never heard of again.
Yeah, there's the maze dragons from the Flood, which is Deadlands the Flood. They have the maze dragons, and that's kind of what you're saying there too. And they have different, they have small ones, big ones, and yeah, those things are kind of scary.
Well, and I think you also need to take liberal use of taking the bestiary and throwing it at the players as just random fantastical creatures. Griffins that are suddenly swooping down on the ship because they are flying between two islands and needed a place to roost. And oh, by the way, they're going to grab lunch among the sailors and then fly off. They're not there to fight a full battle, but they're absolutely, you've got this fantastic creature. And well, okay, so I've got a fantastic creature, a griffin. How does that fit in a naval game? Well, obviously it's landing on the ship to kind of catch its breath before it takes off and heads to the next island, kind of the way it's or something.
Yeah, and I may pay some tribute to the classical, mermaid siren tale type idea that mermaids, there's good mermaids and bad mermaids, and the evil mermaids are like the Greek sirens who lure sailors into the sea to drown them and eat their souls or whatever.
I know a game that has something like that in it.
Yeah, what's it called?
Buccaneer Through Hell and High Water.
Wow, there you go. That sounds like that might be an excellent purchase as source material for such a game. You could do, the possibilities are literally endless, and all we're saying with this Bright Ideas episode is kind of expand your thinking a little bit. Run Civil War, an actual Civil War period piece with exactly the same tech and everything you would have in a Civil War game, except it's the North and South is orcs and elves, or dwarves and elves.
Well, I think just looking at like the past year or so of movies, and saying, hey, I want to draw some inspiration from that and then savage it. You can take like Kong Skull Island. Well, all that is the Tour of Darkness source book for Weird Wars Vietnam, and a kaiju-esque implacable monster that they can't kill, and now you're running a Cthulhuian trek through the jungle as you try to avoid all these monsters that are beyond your ability to keen. Whereas if you go the Great Wall, that Matt Damon movie that made everybody upset, that's a Weird Wars Rome source book being coupled with, hey, let's set it in the Far East, and oh, by the way, here's some aliens from space that attack every once in a while. You can take these things and do these mashups and just grab an existing setting and throw something different at your players than they expect. You take ETU, and instead of it being they're up against, dark magic and ghosts and chupacabra, instead it's interdimensional aliens. Why? Because it lets you do something different from what was expected while still using that source material for the jumping off point. These are ETU students who are suddenly faced with an alien invasion. It's totally an ETU story. It's just not the way ETU's been pitched in the past.
Right.
You can take any of the current Savage stuff and do this because Savage Worlds settings are in and of themselves already mashups, almost every single one.
Right. And it really just comes down to let's slap a new coat of trapping paint on this. And instead of the Herald, we're gonna call that a robot cyborg. Instead of this, we're gonna call that this, but mechanically, it is exactly the Herald. And I'm just gonna use those mechanics. Yeah, you could run. I would say too, with Dave's idea with making it aliens in ETU. Now you're running Buffy meets the X-Files. But you're doing it with ETU in a way that hasn't been presented to the players as ETU. Mm-hmm. You can make it some other university. It doesn't have to be East Texas University. And if you're going to run it in that kind of setting, want to mash it up, absolutely. Make it take place in some, bizarre, not even a great school. Like maybe it's a junior college technical school that this is all happening at. And yeah, there's portals opening up and aliens dragging people away and, monster of the week, werewolves and shit, just like you had with the original X-Files.
Yeah. It's the community college in, what's that one you use all the time? New Lost Tokyo
yeah, some New Lost Tokyo Vegas. Yeah. It's exactly an amalgam of Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Tokyo, and why not New York? Call it New York. Everything's sort of a vague New York in a real world setting. So with that, do we have anything else? Anybody else in chat have something we want to review or share? Discuss?
It seems like the thing in chat tonight is they want us to add a Will It Savage moment to the show where we take something from the audience and determine whether or not it can be savaged. All right. Speak up. I mean, everything they're throwing out so far, we've already talked about, like Pacific Rim, and we did that when we did the kaiju thing and stuff like that. But that seems to be the trend, so that might be something you have to add to the itinerary in the future, Jared, is a regular show savage
bit. A regular show bit. Will It Savage. Okay.
But I mean, other than that, I'm not seeing anything here. Lloyd McVeigh touches on nostalgia at its finest. He killed Thundercats by making the mistake of watching it again, and I think that's absolutely an aspect of some of this too. Is I think that there's a don't take the thing you love the most and try to savage it because you will never be able to recapture it in the bottle. Be wary of the nostalgia goggles getting in the way of you having a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened to me with the old D&D cartoon. I went back to rewatch it, and I was like, oh, my God. This is horrible.
Well, even worse, try to play it.
Yeah, exactly.
Try to recapture the moment that was being, 11 years old and watching, the D&D cartoon over your checks by sitting down with a group of your friends and trying to play it. You're all in your, 40s, 50s, and you can't do it.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's close the show then with a Will It Savage. We're talking 80s nostalgia. Knight Rider. Will It Savage.
Oh, easy.
Easy peasy.
How so?
Wait, it's not already savaged?
I'm surprised, right? Knight Rider. Will It Savage.
Yes.
I mean, there's chase rules, so I don't see how this goes anywhere.
It's not even complicated. You don't even need anything not in the core rulebook.
Right,
Weird
so
science for the car and chase.
Yeah, I would say Kit is a weird science sidekick. So Michael Knight has the sidekick Edge, and his sidekick is a weird science intelligent car in the form of Kit.
And give it lots of trappings. Use powers for what it can do, and trap them.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, the bottom line is that's functionally the answer to most everything that anybody's going to come up with.
Trap it. Yep.
If you need magic, pick an appropriate arcane background and trap the shit out of it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So on that note, until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox, Dave, the Rules Maven Scott, and Jib saying keep rolling and stay savage.